So, activity two is all about kind of fashion 101. Some of you mentioned that you were interested in learning a little bit of fashion history, and that's what we're going to do in this activity, among other things. So, we should just delve right in. Some of the terms that I'm going to be talking about in this video are here. It's really important that you understand these ones so you can not have to worry about those and just learn at a deeper level. So, at the very basic level, I hope that you understand fashion. Fashion needs to be popular, and it's clothes and or accessories, and generally these are worn by trendsetters in society. If you don't know what a trendsetter is, trendsetters are people who believe to have are believed to have a sense of fashion. So other people think that they are fashionable and look to them for their own fashion knowledge. A fashion statement is something that you're wearing that says something about your value of fashion. So, fashion statements are in the eye of the beholder. It could be an outfit, a particular garment, or an accessory. Lastly, a fashion designer. A fashion designer is someone who creates fashion. They envision garments and they work to turn those ideas into reality. So when we look back at fashion, it's important to know what has already happened so we can see trends and things that might pop up again and again. It's also important to see how people have reacted to fashion trends in the past and compare how they react to fashion in the present and in the future. So going way, way back, for the longest time, fashion didn't change that often at all. Sometimes a style of garment might stay fashionable for 100 years. So it made it pretty simple for people that had the means to stay fashionable. So if you bought a dress, it would be fashionable for your generation, your daughter's generation, and maybe even your granddaughter's generation. So good quality clothes would stay in style for quite some time. Once people started selling more and more clothes, things changed. So during the Renaissance, there was more and more people selling things. And also during this time, people were traveling around the world like sailors looking for goods and stuff. And so they were seeing fashion in other places. And so this sped things up. As new products became available, people wanted to people craved those new products. So what's fashionable in Rome? When people had traveled to Rome, they would want to bring those styles back to their little village in Greece, and so fashion would change much much quicker. Also, we have to keep in mind as technology and advertising and communication all get better and better as time goes forward. This is all going to increase the rate of change in fashion. So, obviously, people who had money back in the day were able to be fashionable, just like people that have money now are able to remain fashionable if that's something that's important to them. So, royalty had the most money and social status, so they were the trendsetters. People who worked under royalty, so the aristocracy, wanted to be seen and accepted by royalty, so they would mimic the king or queen's sense of fashion. This was most obvious in France when Louis XIV proclaimed Paris as the fashion capital of Europe. Fashion was extremely important to Louis XIV, and he really pushed fashion to the forefront in France, and that trickled down to many other places in Europe. He actually even had a minister of fashion. So, like the minister of the environment, the minister of finance. He had a minister of fashion. And this person's name was Rose Bertin, which is very interesting because it was a woman at a time where a lot of women were not part of official politics. Rose Bertin was also Marie Antoinette's official designer. And Rose Bertin got so popular that she ended up having a business where she would export her designs and her garments to other places. So she wasn't just a main character in France. If you were not part of the upper class, you would likely wear hand-me-downs. You would purchase secondhand clothing at various merchants, or you could make your own. You would take really good care of your clothing, and you would pass it down to cousins and maybe even children or children's children. If you were of the middle or upper classes, so if you were a merchant or if you were royal, the garments were much, much different. They were embellished, they were decadent, they had jewels, and they were embroidered, and they would remain pristine. So visually, you would be able to tell on the street if someone was rich or someone wasn't. And this was one of the main reasons of the French Revolution. It was very clear in French society who had money and who didn't. And obviously, the people who didn't wanted to have a little bit more power. So after the revolution was over, you see the upper class starting to wear less ostentatious clothing. So they would be simple, they'd be less embellished, to not draw so much attention to themselves. Couture is a word that we're going to talk about throughout the semester, and it's technically the art of dressmaking. It's the highest and most expensive form of fashion. It's basically when a garment is made to a person's measurements, and it's one of a kind. So if you see these words in the course content, there are different words for a male designer right here and a female designer. And Charles Worth was considered the first successful independent couture designer. Well, that didn't translate well. So after the French Revolution, going back to up to the Industrial Revolution, all of these fabrics and fibers needed to be created by hand. And so it took a long time to make clothes, and it was very, very expensive. So people might only have one or two outfits if they don't have a lot of money. Sometimes people would only have one outfit that they would wear every single day. When the steam engine was invented, this allowed for machines to be created, and we see a lot of change in garments. We also see people working in factories. People didn't have to be farmers, and children could also be employed in factories as well. So a lot of farming families that weren't doing so well would move their family to the city and start working in factories. Factories didn't depend on the weather or anything like that a farmer would have to worry about. So the Industrial Revolution actually changed everything. Oops. So here are a bunch of different inventions that affected the textile industry and garment making in general. You can see just in a span of less than 100 years, so this is like 2 generations, all of these things made making clothes a lot easier. So you could weave threads on a loom, you could spin yarns together really fast, you could power a machine based off of water rather than animals, and so that was awesome. You don't have to feed water, it just does its thing. You could improve how cotton was removed, so it made it a lot faster. And then there's a whole bunch of other things like a tape measure, a sewing machine, and a paper pattern that could also influence that. So I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Stay tuned to the next video to catch the rest.